So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to this Inside Hub session on building human rights capacity from compliance to transformation. My name is Alice Homuth. I am the head of consulting at Löning, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator today. Having a look at the participants. Yeah, we're already quite a few. So I think it would be good to slowly start with our webinar. While we wait, maybe a quick introduction to those who don't know us yet. Löning is an international management consultancy specialized in business and human rights based in Berlin. We advise companies on all aspects and elements of human rights and environmental due diligence, including building human rights capacity for any company or individual seeking support and respecting human rights across all business activities through our training programs under Löning Academy. We offer training programs tailored to the various training needs of different functions, from shop floor or line workers to human resources or procurement departments to C-level management of companies also. During the session today, we will share why capacity building and training on human rights is not only useful for compliance with current and future legislations, but we will also share how crucial and fundamental capacity building is for moving your company to go beyond mere compliance to achieve a transformation that allows for effective human rights due diligence. Because according to us, only a workforce with the right mindset and practical know-how will actually be able to address human rights risks effectively. All right, before I take you through the points we would like to discuss today as the moderator of the session, I will quickly introduce myself as well as my two colleagues. As the head of consulting at Löning, my responsibilities include organizing our different projects and project teams, guide the teams on content, methodological questions, as well as making sure that our services stay up to date in best serving our clients' needs. I'm here today with my two colleagues from our dream team, who are the co-leads of the Learning Academy, which is Rita Delgado Correcher, who holds a PhD with honors in human rights, democracy, and international justice. As a professor, she also has been teaching human rights related topics for the past 5 years, initially at the Faculty of International Law at the University of Valencia, and currently at ESIC, how I learned to pronounce it, the Business and Marketing School. Before academia, Rita actually worked as a corporate and criminal lawyer for over 10 years, and Rita is also a consultant at Löning and Löning's partner in Spain, and as I said, the co-head of the Learning Academy. Leonel, Lisboa is with us today as well. Leonel is a human rights lawyer from Brazil with over a decade of experience in both public and private sectors. For the past 6 years, he worked on business and human rights topics as a consultant, in-house as a transnational mining company, where he designed large-scale corporate training programs, implemented human rights risk management processes, and conducted human rights risk impact assessments in dozens of operations, several of them also in Brazil's Amazon region. At Learning, Leonel is also one of our consultants and co-leads the Academy with Rita. So thanks you two for joining today. Before we start, let me remind us of a few things. Our Inside Hub sessions are structured as 45 minutes webinars featuring expert insights and an interactive discussions with our audience, you. We'll begin with a 30-minute conversation on the topic, and then the last 15 minutes or so will be dedicated entirely to the Q&A. Please use the Zoom Q&A function that you'll find for your questions, not to be confused with the chat function. And you can also upvote existing questions to help us prioritize the most relevant to you. Also, if we run out of time, that we make sure we address the most relevant ones. If we do run out of time and any questions remain unanswered, we'll just make sure to follow up with the answers after the session by email. And a recording of the webinar will also be available to you, that you can share it with your colleagues afterwards, for example. Short disclaimer, we do not give any legal advice, although we have a lot of legal expertise here in the room. We only interpret the text of the law with our expertise and experience as management consultants, but we do not give any legal advice. Just that's clear. But let's take some time to start into the world of training in human rights. What do we mean by that? So as per our Learning Academy definition, we consider human rights training in the business context as any form of training or capacity building exercise that informs and or enables employees of companies, but also their suppliers and other impacted stakeholders to effectively implement human rights due diligence. And from our experience over the past years, we see that there are many different types of trainings, target audiences, and so on. Many of you will know the quite general trainings in the form of e-learning, maybe, that school you on your company's, I don't know, code of conduct and values. You'll also probably be familiar, with the fire drills and emergency trainings with very concrete information being transmitted to you, for example, of where your nearest fire exit is located. But before we dive into all the different types and rules of human rights training, let's take a step back by looking at the bigger picture, really, which is currently being framed by international frameworks and new legislation. So, Leonel, we've been seeing that progressively many international standards and national acts have been introduced to the business and human rights landscape. Maybe the most recent and significant of them all being the CSDDD, luckily now adapted by the EU this year. The focus of these developments has been on reducing the risks for human rights violations by companies. But what are the main requirements companies face now, considering the management of such risks, and what is the connection really to human rights trainings?
Yeah, Alice. So considering these specific legal frameworks, I'll first talk about the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive that you mentioned, the CSDDD. So this directive requires companies to implement due diligence strategies that include effective measures for preventing and addressing human rights and environmental risks throughout the company's operations and supply chains. And companies are expected to integrate human rights considerations into their business practices through training programs for all levels of the organization. The LKSG is similar to that, the German Supply Chain Act, but the LKSG is even more explicit. It emphasizes the importance of training as part of a company's risk management system. The LKSG also mandates that companies regularly train their employees and partners, especially the ones that are involved in procurement and supply chain management, to recognize and address human rights risks. And these training programs are a key preventive measure in ensuring that workers and business partners can identify the early signs and take corrective actions before human rights violations occur. So, so I mentioned the EU standard, the German standard, and now a more global one that I think it's also important to mention here. So the United Nations Guiding Principles on human rights, on business and human rights, which is like the gold standard, the most important reference on business and human rights. On Principle 16, companies are expected to ensure that employees are trained in an adequate manner to understand the company's human rights responsibilities. This is even more relevant in high-risk sectors or regions where violations are more likely to occur. So the guiding principles highlight that trainings are not just a matter of compliance, but a critical tool in embedding human rights into the company's culture and on everyday operations, Alicia.
Okay, so you say that, it's not a matter of compliance, but I know that for many companies, those requirements are like really generic and just another bureaucratic chore. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so first talking about this thing of maybe being too generic. So The new laws that have been introduced need to be generic because of the intense diversity and complexity of business sectors and circumstances. And this is why it matters so much to have experts designing and implementing human rights trainings for businesses. The companies need the support of specialists that understand specific regulations and standards, as well as risks and opportunities they face, in order to create effective capacity building that can promote change and prevent human rights violations. And one example of that, a bit more specific, I think that it's good to mention here, is the voluntary principles on security and human rights. So these are principles that provide a framework that is more specific for extractive industries, mining, oil and gas, but it can also apply to other sectors that operate on high-risk environments. So there is a set of principles that outline the importance of training security personnel to respect human rights and manage conflicts in a way that minimizes harm to individuals. Companies are then required to provide training sessions on a regular basis under specific international standards of content. And they work as preventive measures, these trainings, to ensure that security providers, both public and private personnel, operate in line with international human rights standards.
Okay, interesting. So that was the generic part, I suppose, of the question. But what about the perception that those requirements are sometimes, just a bureaucratic chore? Companies are required to put policies in place, have internal assessments, watch their supply chain, train their workers, just to mention some of these tasks. How can companies kind of like deal with these expectations in a more constructive way that is maybe less compliance driven and more forward looking?
Yeah, and this is one of the issues that clients sometimes raise to us, right? So in fact, we know like the recent regulatory framework is actually pushing the boundaries in terms of corporate human rights responsibility. And I think that the most important thing here is to understand that it's not about compliance, but not only about compliance, but about offering businesses an opportunity to reshape their internal cultures and practices. So what we do is that we get together with clients to identify their needs effectively for internal cultural change. So no company should be just promoting trains just to tick a box in a checklist. That is a waste of money, and it's worse. It's a waste of the opportunity to build internal capacity for transformation of the organization, because that's what shareholders, regulators, stakeholders expect from businesses now, right? We know companies are machines of solving problems for clients, for customers, for society. Now the power of businesses is being recruited for solving the very complex problems that we have in our reality on human rights and sustainability. And to respond to that call, companies needed to build internal capacity and transform. We see this constantly. Without a proper training at all levels of the organization, even the most well-intentioned human rights policies can just fall flat. And our experience at Learning Academy demonstrates that trainings are not just to reduce risks. Let's put it that way. It's not about just avoiding bad things. It's about being a driver of innovation and trust. And Alice, I think that as we see here in learning, companies can actually integrate human rights principles into their operations, not only to reduce these risks, to build stronger, better relationships with workers, communities, and consumers, I think.
Okay. Well, thanks for highlighting how essential training is under mandatory human rights due diligence and this visionary outlook, how it can be used to change companies also. Rita, what do you say to companies outside, the countries that are directly affected by these laws? Can they also benefit from this kind of training, as Leonel was kind of like painting the picture?
First of all, good morning, everyone. And yeah, absolutely, Alice. Training isn't just about ticking the box. for companies under this new mandatory human rights due diligence legislation. It is also a strategic asset for companies globally, regardless of their location. And we're really living this firsthand in Spain, in the agri-food sector. Many Spanish suppliers are adapting their operations to meet the due diligence expectations of the German buyers, since they are already bound, the buyers, by the LKSG. And Spain, let's remember, 50% of our agricultural produce is exported to Germany. So you can see the importance of this. These suppliers understand that demonstrating compliance with the standards is crucial to maintaining their contracts. At the moment, we're working on several projects, actually helping these suppliers navigate the expectations, but not only that, also prepare for future legislation, ensuring they remain competitive. And even nowadays, we're also having conversations with several countries in Latin America on the same respect. In this context, not only that, as I was mentioning, Leonel has previously underlined, many companies across the EU, not just in Germany or France, are now preparing, because soon they will face also these mandatory obligations as the CSDDD comes soon into effect. The question businesses need to think about and ask themselves right now is then, do they want to react later or prepare now? And we always say, by investing in training today, they can future-proof their operations. It's an investment for the future, because in our experience, these issues, like I tell my students, wearing the human rights due diligence glasses isn't an easy task, or speaking the human rights language. So even more, companies that train their teams early can shape, as Leonel was just mentioning, their corporate culture and embed sustainable practice throughout their operations and supply chains. And one key lesson that we have learned in the many trainings that we have designed is the importance of capacity building and clear communication within the company. It's crucial to educate and inform internal stakeholders, not only the external ones, particularly those in departments that may be a little bit more reluctant to change, such as procurement, about not only the regulations, but also the underlying reasons behind them. What I mean by this, we have to explain why these measures are necessary and how they serve the long-term interests of the company. Ultimately, this goes beyond compliance, as we've been saying all along. It's about embedding human rights into the fabric of your organization.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very powerful point and also a very challenging one, I suppose, Rita. But what about, for example, then the long-term strategy? How can companies ensure that this commitment to human rights is also sustained over time, right?
Well, if you ask me, this responsibility goes a little bit forward in companies. The key issue for successful long-term strategy is simply to begin even earlier. And here, as a professor of human rights and sustainability at a business school, I've seen firsthand that it's very important that we also start integrating all these topics into education of future business leaders. At the moment, I think most business schools are very emphasizing traditional subjects like finance, strategy, and management. But I tell you, students are very eager to learn about sustainability, ethics, and human rights. And I think increasingly this should be included in the curricula, and then we should adapt our priorities. We shouldn't really treat human rights anymore as a compliance matter, but business schools should really shape leaders who understand that human rights and sustainability are fundamental to creating value, trust, and driving innovation in the corporate world.
Well, yeah, challenging, I would say. And I mean, what we also hear from our clients is that they also want to be more attractive to this new generation, you know, of people looking for employers with a mission, with a value that also adhere to these standards. Yeah, cool. So we've heard a lot about the why of human rights training, you know, be it from compliance or strategic reasons. But I would like to hear more about the how, so the practical implementation of training. Let's talk about the different kinds of trainings we have done to get a good overview, maybe. Leonel, could you tell us what, you know, a recent project has been that you've been involved in that you found particularly interesting?
Yeah, Alice, I think that it's worth mentioning here a project that it's actually one that we are working now on it. So it's a client in the luxury sector, and it's a company that operates in all continents. And we are in the process of developing a very specialized in-person training that is a 3-hour workshop. And the workshop is tailored to specific departments and regions in which the company operates, but also to the specific functions and specific risks in specific sectors, specific departments of that company, and helping these people deal with legislations and business risks that they face everywhere. And of course, so we are dealing with many different audiences, but most of them are on management level employees. So we're focusing on that first. And we're making these workshops highly interactive and designed to give employees the tools that they need to apply what they learn immediately. So each department will receive like tailored content directly relevant for their role, ensuring they understand first the specific legal requirements and standards for their region and for their products, and how they impact their day-to-day operations. And again, another thing that is interesting for the style that we're doing, it's a mixed approach of direct delivery and a train the trainer. So on the first stage, we are directly delivering the training side by side with our colleagues in the internal human rights team of the client. And on a second stage, then the company will carry on and roll out the training, scaling it up so that the program can reach global operations. This is one of the approaches that we have that we help companies reach their goals with flexibility, right?
Yeah, that sounds quite promising, especially this train the trainer model. Seems like quite a sustainable way to ensure that the training is implemented throughout the company. Have you used this model also in other projects? Is it something that works well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we used that also with a client in the engineering sector. They needed to train their global force very quickly, and after we assessed their needs, we found that the trainer concept was the best way to go. So the idea was to identify what we call champions of sustainability or champions for human rights, people that are motivated, interested in change, and that can deliver trainings themselves. So building the skills and knowledge of these internal champions, they are then able to cascade the training to their teams. And this ensures that every employee, no matter where they are, they receive trainings on sustainability and human rights. And this is scalable, this is time efficient, and it empowers the company and the community inside the company to deal with human rights. And what I think is the most interesting thing about this approach is that it also builds a network of these human rights champions. And this is very interesting because it helps identify and it helps deal with human rights risks, and also build this network of trust inside the company. It allows also this idea of having this network and local trainers. So it allows also the content to be adapted to specific contexts. And this is one of the things that I think most benefits companies and fosters innovation and leadership development.
Great. And I guess it's something that works for, smaller companies, but also for large companies. So it's quite flexible. Thanks. So hearing about all of these interesting projects, I have to wonder though, Rita, how do the companies know where to start? So how to know whether this approach explained by Leonel also works for them, whether they need something else? How do they start?
Well, I think I can actually address this question again by referring to a past project, in this case for a client in the technical textile sector. So in this particular occasion, we did not create the content of the training, neither deliver the training ourselves, but what we did for them is creating a training roadmap. So this helped them align with existing and upcoming human rights due diligence obligations. Because as was mentioned previously, sometimes what is exactly needed to align with regulations is not crystal clear, and this uncertainty, so to say, requires a tailored approach that considers both the company's specific context and the evolving nature of legal standards. So in this particular case, we conducted a very in-depth needs assessment to identify the key areas of the company where training was necessary. And these ranged from senior management and departments daily dealing with human rights due diligence tasks, so to say, down to operational teams and suppliers, both tier 1 and tier 2. And then taking everything into account, we developed a roadmap who actually stated who needed to be trained and the content of the trainings. Again, just like having a blueprint, not really getting into develop the content. And then how the training should be delivered from a methodological point of view, that is e-learning for scalability, but also in-person workshops for more practical in-person experiential training. And then even when and how often the training should be conducted, because as we know, companies don't have unlimited resources. So we needed to prioritize from a risk-based approach what was more urgent. Then, in my opinion, what made this super valuable is that it really gave the client an idea, a comprehensive idea of the full spectrum of training and capacity building in the field. And then most importantly, they get to realize that this is not a one-off task, a single project, but it's an ongoing integrated process that goes on in time.
Great. I mean, also looking at the questions that are coming in, I think maybe, already covering one of the questions maybe. So we've talked about the different audiences and target groups of trainings, and we heard some examples about, office and management staff being trained. And I think you also mentioned educating operational teams, all over the world. Have you worked on any program that involved training really large numbers of employees across multiple regions, maybe also with very different backgrounds?
Yes, indeed, we've done a couple of very large e-learning programs for companies in the metals and manufacturing sectors. And they were designed to reach entire workforces across various countries. In this case, of course, covering like the basics of human rights due diligence, but always having like a tailor-made approach to the sector so people can relate to case studies, examples. One of such projects involved creating an e-learning platform available in 20 languages and reaching more than 20,000 employees in 75 countries. So quite a challenge. This ensured that employees at all levels in different locations could access this consistent, comprehensive training of human rights and at least have an idea of what are human rights and why are they important, and how can they, in their daily activities, affect and benefit this process. And particularly, this was also suitable for the client because it was a really scalable solution, can be updated, and it ensures that the whole workforce is on board of this change that they're trying to push.
I see. Because you talked about like this technical aspect, does the Academy also offer technical e-learning solutions, for example, in the form of a platform, for example?
No, we don't have, so to say, our own e-learning platform that you can buy a course from, but we work with several trusted partners who provide top-tier technical solutions. So for each project, we actually choose the best fit so that it addresses the specific needs of the clients in change. For instance, in the e-learning project that I was just talking about, we partnered with a service provider on gamified e-learning, and it was a very good fit for this project because it's very user-friendly, again, it's scalable, and it focuses in very practical scenario-based learning. And this was exactly what we needed in the case. But of course, again, if the client, for instance, has their own learning management system, as many times is the case, we can also just provide a content that they can integrate in the system that they already have.
Exactly right, because as we also do in our consulting work, we try to not reinvent the wheel, but we just see what training processes the company already has in place, be it from their human resource department or, I don't know, health and safety department. You know, there's a lot of trainings being rolled out. So sometimes we also see what works well, and then kind of attach ourselves to one of those trainings or do something parallel using the same platforms, the same features, so that the audience, as in the workforce, already recognizes these things. Great. Thank you, Rita and Leonel, for your insights. There's two more questions. Let me quickly add a short thought while I encourage you in the audience to also start posting more questions if you might have any in the Q&A function. I would just like to highlight that although we have the Academy as a standalone kind of thing within learning, in practice, our work between consulting and training is much more intertwined. Often the need for training appears only when we do the consulting, when we do consulting with a client, for example, on how to set up a risk management process or rolling out a policy to certain departments. One example is that we frequently train also procurement departments, as they are the key actors in many companies when it comes to dealing with suppliers, the supply chain. Similarly, we often get contacted by clients to conduct just a short training or to do a workshop on a very specific topic or challenge that they're facing, where we then sometimes realize together with the clients it's not necessarily only a question of the knowledge on human rights that is missing, that the specific people need to be trained on, but it's also a question of, a process maybe not being very clear to guide the target group in applying this knowledge in their daily work. So then we sometimes also take a step back and have a look at the process, for example, a supplier onboarding process or something, to then be able to combine the consulting and the training aspects. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. Thank you for that. I think one of them definitely also refers to, different people, because training is all about people that are being trained, individuals, and every individual has their own challenges that they bring with them, but also opportunities. So of course, there are sometimes people in a company that already have a lot of tasks, a lot of things to do, that don't want to be trained, as it was put here, just because they don't see really the content being relevant for them. They say, like, why should I take care of it? For example, in the procurement, for example, in HR, they say, human rights, that's the topic for the CSR department. That's not our topic. And I think this question really also is linked to why we need the buy-in of the management. How do you make sure the management is also on board? And how do you make sure that the tone from the top trickles down all the way to kind of the people that then have to implement the strategy, for example? So I think this is a kind of like combination question that also, knowing, Leonel, that you've worked on a similar project, for example, the one that you also mentioned, where we prepared kind of the concept for it. How was it made sure that then, with the help of the sustainability champions, for example, it was made clear to the individuals why a certain topic like human rights is actually also relevant to their tasks, and not just like some abstract concept floating around that doesn't have anything to do with the concrete tasks maybe of this individual? Yeah.
So yes, this thing of having sometimes people don't want to be trained or don't see the value of being trained, or there's also this question of considering transnational corporations with thousands of workers on different locations. So the first thing is to understand the real needs of each company. So that's why we sit with the company to understand the needs and the opportunities that we have on that specific company. So there isn't a silver bullet for everything. But a general advice is to understand that a general level of training for all workers needs to be provided, either using IT solutions or on-the-ground trainings conducted by trainers that can be trained and on a cascading level. So you train human rights champions, and then they can train other people, and those people can train other people. So you spread the content of human rights, the discussions, the understanding of the internal processes. And talking about the buy-in of the management level, so people work with different sets of incentives, but in general, the incentive of seeing that other competitors are moving on that direction. There are new regulations coming up. Shareholders are talking about it. Creditors are talking about it. Clients are talking about it. So it is a way of showing that we need to come up to this and answer as a company to that, and not only be followers of what the others are doing. And this is a moment very good for that leaders can actually lead their company into changing. So this is a very good argument. All these financial arguments, the legal arguments, but also the argument of being able to lead change and not just be followers of change.
Exactly. And I think what we've, so we hear this challenge a lot, actually, you know, how to, because often the CSR staff or the people in charge of then promoting human rights within an organization, they're often in a sandwich position because, you know, they have this task by the management team that they get, okay, you do the whole human rights stuff, you know, you do the compliance, the whatever human rights due diligence we have to do. And then the question of, you know, how do I get then buy-in from the management is one we get frequently. We offer, you know, sit downs on management level where we say, okay, let's do a 1-hour session with the management where some of our senior members of the team sit down with the management and really try to speak their language and explain why it would be good for them to now do certain kinds of human rights due diligence activities. You know, we can play the compliance card, we can play the other cards that Leonel was mentioning. So it's always a matter of meeting the person in their language and with the arguments that they need. And similarly, also how to address, you know, individuals who may be not super keen of having yet another topic on their table, for example, human rights. Also there, try to speak their language. And maybe also with, you know, the backup of the management, it's easier to approach these people, and then to maybe also shift responsibilities, shift tasks, or reshape maybe certain positions so that they don't have to do everything, but so that the, you know, human rights topics are kind of like intertwined with their daily activities and it doesn't look like it's something on top that is separate from what they're doing anyway. Rita, sorry, I know you also wanted to maybe contribute.
Yeah, maybe if I can complement a little bit, also reading some of the questions that are popping out. I think also my experience teaching 17-year-olds has taught me that what is very important to keep people engaged in general is, as Leonel was mentioning, first to do a very in-depth needs analysis, because if you're conveying material that's too generic, they're going to be bored. And if it's too complicated, they're going to be confused. So it's very important to build on what they know, but it's also super important to make this connection so that they see that this is not something they're learning in the void, but is very linked to their daily tasks. I think a part of our work is always to link whatever kind of training for leaders, for like workforce, but to their daily tasks so that they understand what's in, like, how can they contribute and why is this important for them in their lives and in their work. And since I'm speaking, maybe I can address another question that I've seen there and it was directly linked to the project, because they were asking about like where to start, what trainings maybe come first. Can we do one training? No, I think as we were mentioning, this is an ongoing obligation. And then we were even asking, like, you need to, some employees need refreshers. Also, of course, legal obligations are going to evolve, but let's not be overwhelmed by this. We need to follow a risk-based approach. So of course, at some point, there's different priority groups that need to be trained, but we need to choose where to start, okay? And for instance, the LKSG is a little bit more explicit as Leonel and gives the example of procurement, because obviously from a risk-based approach, this is a very important target group. But then, yeah, we really need to see the concrete circumstances of the company in order to address what comes first.
Exactly. And also in our exchange, for example, with the German agency responsible for implementing and supervising the LKSG, the BAFA, You know, whenever we talk to them about, you know, what exactly would be good or bad or enough for a company, they always refer us back, and rightly so, to the appropriateness criteria. And that's also something we look at when we create like a training roadmap for a company. What would be expected, what would be appropriate for this company, concerning also having a look at their context, their specific risk context. How big is the company? What sector are they in? How many different, you know, groups of maybe target groups or audiences do they have within their company? How many suppliers do they have that would need to be trained? How, you know, where are the main risks being also dealt with? Is it the procurement department, or is it rather their internal departments, because they have a huge, I don't know, own mining operations? So of course, a lot of the risks will be within the company. So it is so specific to the company that unfortunately we're not able to give an easy answer at this point, but it really depends. As with, you know, a lot of the elements of human rights due diligence, it always depends on your company. But as we said, I think some of the guidelines we can give is always have a look at, you know, what sector are you in? How many people are you in your company? How's your risk exposition? And, you know, this will definitely help you to try to focus, okay, where to start with the training, who to train first. And then obviously, you know, the types of trainings can range from just a very general e-learning to very specific training, specifically, for example, for your procurement team, also with case studies, or like how to deal with suppliers, or like cases of child labor. You know, also remediation is a big topic for training. So training is a big area. But if you look at it in a more structured way and don't jump in head first and just start doing random trainings just, you know, to be able to tick a box, then I think you will also find that it's quite helpful and beneficial for your company, and it doesn't only cost money, but it will also create a value. Right, sorry for that little topic. There is a question also on the Human Rights Office training, which I'm very happy about, because we have done Human Rights Officer trainings in the past. We have kind of paused it a little because a lot of the companies were now, you know, they have human rights officers in place. They were busy doing things and implementing things. But if there is now, again, interest in the question how to be a human rights officer, because no, you don't have to, by law, do a human rights officer training. The laws just say that would be good if the person in charge of human rights due diligence in your company actually is qualified. So if you're looking also to qualify the people responsible for human rights in your company, reach out to us, you know, and we'll see if we have a human rights officer training coming up. Yeah. So a lot of questions. We'll go through them afterwards and see if we missed anything, and then also send the answers to you. Yeah, just maybe a mini summary of what we've learned. So it's not just enough, you know, to have written policies and processes. People actually need to know why they're doing human rights due diligence, and they need to know what they're doing and what consequences their action have. So effective implementation of human rights due diligence means also training. And we have learned that it's important to differentiate between the different audiences, methods, and so on, and to have a plan of what you're doing. So our 45 minutes are up. Thank you very much. We'll get back to you with unanswered questions, as I said. We will share the link to the recording of this webinar. And don't hesitate to reach out to us for support, either the Academy or, of course, also on consulting. We're planning a few more Insight Hub sessions in October and November. So stay tuned, subscribe to our monthly briefings, or follow us on LinkedIn, and you'll be informed of any new activities that we're planning. Thank you very much also to you two as our speakers. And yeah, we hope to see you in our Insight Hub soon, and keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
great
you.